Hello, this is Jay Mitchell. We are back with another episode of the Libertarian Censored podcast, going over all the posts on the Libertarian Censored subreddit. Let's get right into it. So first we have Jon Stewart on Israel's urgent Iran strike, Minnesota murders, and Maggie's blame game from The Daily Show on YouTube, posted by Mundane Image 13. They added, I know The Daily Show is considered leftist and probably extreme left to most conservatives, but Jon Stewart raises some absolutely poignant points and questions on the actions over the weekend. And yeah, I definitely don't agree with Trump's actions in escalating the conflict between Israel and Iran and getting the U.S. involved with it. But that being said, Jon Stewart is definitely not the one controlling the narrative anymore. It's not 2006 anymore, He's not the one who is controlling the narrative when it comes to all the politics and all that. Increasingly that's social media. It's not stuff like the Daily Show anymore. And I think Jon Stewart's better than a lot of them, like John Oliver or Jimmy Kimmel and all that. He's not full blue NPC. He did say that COVID might have been a lab leak, even when that was unpopular to say. But even so, he's definitely not one. He's definitely more a source of the past than a source of the future. And yeah, I heard that in some of the he also misrepresented some people on the right's points. Some of the anti-MAGA, some of the MAGA people who were anti-Iran war, and yeah, just go to show you how people like him, they might say, oh, I have all the correct narrative pushing and all that. But, increasingly, they're not the ones who control the narrative anymore. And the progressive argument is always, it's not technically news, it's a comedy show. And, yeah, just because it's a comedy show doesn't mean, it's not where a lot of progressives get their news from. And, yeah, personally, I think it's time for stuff like The Daily Show to go off the air entirely. I don't want to force it off the air. I don't think that'd be very libertarian. But I do think the libertarian position is it should be increasingly irrelevant, and yeah, that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have Yes, This Is Real from Donald Key, and that's crosswords from the Religious Fruitcake subreddit. Trump posts long text message from Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee about hearing from God on what to do next, and that's the truth from Donald Trump, from Mike Huckabee, a past politician, ambassador, and great person. And that his text is, Mr. President, God spared you in Butler, Pennsylvania to be the most consequential president in a century, maybe ever. The decisions on your shoulders I would not want to be made by anyone else. You have many voices speaking but with you, sir, but there is only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in the land, and I am in this land I am available for you, but I do not try to get in your presence often because I trust your instincts. No president in my lifetime has been in a position like yours, not since Truman in 1945. I don't reach you to persuade you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear from heaven, and the voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to make sure our flag flies above our embassy. My job is to be the last one to leave. I will not abandon this post. Our flag will not come down. You did not seek this moment. The moment sought you. It is our honor to serve you, Mike Huckabee. And yeah, personally, I think this is what stuff like this is. Increasingly people can't tell the difference between the church and the state anymore, because for a lot of people these days, both on the left and the right, the state is the church. But regardless, Israel shouldn't be dictating America's foreign policy, even though it clearly does. Pretty much every representative and senator is bought and paid for by Israel, as are Trump and probably Huckabee as well. And that's not something that I care for. We shouldn't have Israel's not the 51st state. They need to handle their own affairs. The United States needs to get out of it, and that's my thoughts on that issue. Then we have NYC mayoral candidate arrested after demanding ICE agents show a warrant for detaining an immigrant immediately after their hearing concludes. From Baton 13, that's crosswords from the public freakout subreddit. NYC mayoral candidate Brad Lander is grabbed by mass federal agents and pulled into a courthouse elevator. And yeah, personally, I think he knew what he was doing. He just wants political capital for the upcoming DNC primary for the New York mayoral election, and running into ICE and yelling about warrants is a good way of doing that. Personally, I don't really care for ICE, but people like Lander here make me sick when they just do stuff like this just to get political capital and talked about on social media. He might be better than sex pest DNC shill Andrew Cuomo or that socialist guy they're pushing, that Zoran. Begins last name because now I don't know how to pronounce it. But just because he might be better than those guys doesn't mean much. And this stunt is just clearly just to get political capital for the upcoming primary and eventual mayoral election. Then we have Oh Man, posted by Fast Seaworthiness 739, and that's a screenshot from a Fox News headline: Massey to field bipartisan war powers resolution to bar U.S. from Israel-Iran war. AOC signals support. And I would agree with Massey and AOC on that one. But, increasingly Congress doesn't have any power when it comes to declarations of war. The president pretty much has all the power when it comes to war, because that's because the U.S. hasn't actually formally declared war since it declared war against Bulgaria in 1942. And the president can just pretty much justify doing whatever they want as the power has been centralized in the presidency since, I would say, around Woodrow Wilson's term in office. But I definitely do think you need to stand up to the push to get us involved in the Israel-Iran war. I personally don't think Trump's going to get involved, because I think he knows how disastrous that was for the GOP and when it came to the Iraq war and how much political capital it cost the party. But I don't think it's going to be the U.S. will get involved for that reason. But I think if Trump could get if he could get away with it, he probably would. Then we have masked ICE agents violently arrested a U.S. citizen and elected official for asking to see a judicial warrant from amni.com, posted by Donald Key, and that's crosspost from the Law subreddit. And we already talked about this. Of course he's going to be Reddit's hero, but eventually Reddit will move on to something else, and this guy's going to be forgotten about. And it was clearly, as I said, just a political stunt to gain political capital. Then we have Iraq is WMD from Mundane Image 13, and that's a picture of George W. Bush, Iraq is WMDs, and that's Donald Trump, Iran is WMDs, and that's that meme from Back to the Future, Marty McFly saying, "Hey, I've seen this one." And in a lot of ways, I would agree with that. In a lot of ways, Donald Trump's just edgy. George W. Bush, he markets himself a bit differently. I personally think Bush is probably the worst president, but Trump's not very good either, even if I might agree with more of Trump's rhetoric than Bush's, because increasingly Trump's just going full neocon, and even in his first term he had elements of neocon, like when he appointed John Bolton to serve as his advisor. That's not something that I particularly care for, and that just goes to show you, they might say it's every election supposedly super important, but it's either you get stabbed in the front with Kamala, who was campaigning around the warmonger Cheneys, or Trump, who says, "Oh, I'm anti-war, this is the pro-peace ticket," and then the second he gets in office, he's suddenly pro-war. And that just goes to show you, you can't trust either of the major parties when it comes to supporting peace. Then we have the $250 EV tax is no legal precedent in over 200 years from InsideEvs.com, posted by CH4Locks, and that's crosspost from the electric vehicles subreddit. And personally, I don't think any taxes are justified. But with that being said, this is just kind of another Republicans bad post. It's pretty much all the posts in the subreddit are either Republicans bad or Trump bad, and it gets kind of tiring after a while. And personally, I only think they're passing the tax because Elon's not in the good graces of the GOP anymore after his bout with Trump. And I don't think there should be a tax on anything, but it just goes to show you, they're only doing it because they can get away with it. That when Elon was in Trump's good graces, there probably wouldn't have been an EV tax, but now that he's out of his good graces, suddenly that's what they're pushing. Then we have Trump considers strike on Iran ahead of crucial situation room meeting, and that's from Axios.com. That's crosspost from the geopolitics subreddit. And hopefully he makes the right decision. Personally, as I said earlier, I don't think that he has the political capital to go to full all out against Iran, but I think he'll probably go as far as he can. And that's Trump's, I think, is relatively good at knowing what he can and can't get away with. So I don't think he'll go as far out as people are saying he's going to do, but I think he'll go as far out as he realistically can in regards to going out against Iran. Then we have, is this a monopoly on public land? And that's a YouTube video from Reason TV, posted by FlimsyOut5563. And personally, I don't think there should be a monopoly on public lands, even if it's national parks or anything. And it's not something I particularly care for. And I think all land should be owned privately rather than publicly, and I think that's very much the libertarian position. Libertarian position is for private property rather than public property, as much as possible. And that's my thoughts on that issue. And I think we're going to wrap it up there. I'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.